And the other thing we tend to do is compare our behind the scenes to other people's highlight reel. We're not seeing other people's messy floor on Instagram. We're seeing their carefully curated image. We don't see the stuff that's behind the scenes. You're seeing their eye level stuff. You don't see their messy floor. You have no idea that they have a messy floor too.
Are you looking for ways to diversify your income? In January, I'm starting a cohort of therapists to start creating online content to increase your impact, influence, and income. Visit coursecreationstudio.com and look for resources on starting your own online course today.
Hey, Scaling Therapy Practice fans, it's Nancy Norbeck from Follow Your Curiosity. It's the podcast where we explore guests' creative journeys and what they've learned along the way. And I also offer creativity tips to help you get unstuck and stay that way. Check out my November 3rd, 2024 episode with Lucinda Sage Midgordon, where we talk about why you should make bad art. You are listening to Scaling Therapy Practice. Here's your host, James Marland.
Hello, and welcome back to the Scaling Therapy Practice. This is the show where we empower mission-driven leaders to launch life-changing online courses. I'm your host, James Marland, and today I have a very special guest, Nancy Norbeck. Nancy Norbeck is a master's certified Kaizen Muse creativity coach, and she hosts Follow Your Curiosity podcast. And I started recognizing her, noticing her when she's talking about dealing with perfectionism and getting over that tendency to rework, rehash, redo something 99 times, but never get it fully pushed out the door. If you've listened to the podcast, you know that's something I've dealt with. So I'm really happy to learn from Nancy's wisdom. Hey, Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
So I like to start out with a little bit of history because not everybody starts out creating online courses and doing passive income. Normally have a life before what we're doing now. So what's your story? How did you get us up to the point where you said, you know what, maybe I should lead an online course?
Well, I'll try to give you the short version. I
know.
I actually started my career, such as it was doing tech support. And that was a good while back. And then, that wasn't what I studied as an undergrad. I was an English major, but I was doing technical writing, and then I ended up doing tech support. And eventually I said, I'd kind of like to use my English degree. So I was doing tech support at a school, and I said, hi, could I, do some teaching? And so they let me switch from teaching tech classes to teaching English as a second language classes, which I really, really loved. And when that dried up during the Great Recession, I landed in editing and proofreading in a fundraising office. And, it was one of those things where I discovered, you can take the teacher out of the classroom, but you can't really take the classroom out of the teacher. And I discovered coaching, which is a lot like teaching, but without parents and report cards and detention and all the stuff that people don't like about teaching. So I started creating my own courses on a smaller scale and teaching them back in the days before Zoom, when we had phone conference lines. And I really, really liked that, but they were small and I didn't really know how to make them any bigger or keep doing them on a regular basis. And I had this day gig. And so that was really kind of what was occupying my time. And these days I finally decided to take the leap and do it on a bigger scale. And in the meantime, I started the podcast trying to get people doing their creative stuff and not letting things like perfectionism get in their way. So that's the short answer to the question. You can feel free to have me expand on that anywhere you like.
Yeah. So one of your main topics is perfectionism. And if you're listening to this show, you might have heard me talk about that a little bit before, but it's often something creative types or analytical types suffer with. We want to get it right. I think uh, part of me is I don't like wasting time or money. So if I'm going to release something, I want to release it well. And then I end up not releasing it at all. Like weeks turn into months. So can you talk about that process? Why do people get stuck in that perfectionism trap?
We get stuck in the perfectionism trap because it's drilled into us from the time we're kids. I mean, one of the things that immediately comes into my head is like when you learn penmanship in school. They give you the little template and you're supposed to trace the template. And why do they do that? Well, because it's easy, right? The easy way to learn to form letters is to trace over somebody else's. But then at least in my school, they hung them all on the wall and they put stickers next to the ones that were the closest to the template. And so you were comparing yours to everybody else's, and you immediately got the sense that the ones that were closest to perfect were the better ones. And if yours weren't closest to perfect, you weren't good enough. Stuff like that happens everywhere. And even now as adults, we don't have teachers putting stickers next to the ones that are better. No, we have Instagram that's constantly showing us that, your friends and neighbors have more perfect lives than you do, which is all a lie because it's just for show. But it's hard not to believe it. And the thing is, I'll tell you the thing that surprised me the most about perfectionism when I was in coach training, because I was convinced that I was not a perfectionist. Why? Because a lot of creatives are messy people, right? We've got paints and papers and stuff all over the place. It kind of tends to come with the territory.
You can't see my floor. It went in the camera here, but I have stuff everywhere.
Right?
I organize in piles. Right in front of me, I have my note cards that I wrote out. Over here, down here, I have my notebook. Should it be on a shelf somewhere, neatly organized? Yeah, but I'm in that messy pile. If I don't see it, I don't know it's there type of person.
Exactly. And so I had let myself off the perfectionism hook because I was convinced that if I was a perfectionist, all of the labels on all of the cans in my kitchen would be organized by color and arranged, so that they all faced in the same direction. Because to me, that's what perfectionism meant. And the coach who was assigned to me for coach training said to me one day, "Are there things that you don't start because you're convinced that they will never be good enough?" And I
Ooh,
said,
what?
"Oh," because she said, "That's perfectionism." And I went, "Oh, crap, I'm a perfectionist."
No, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. There's sometimes I sit down at my computer knowing I need to do something, but I end up getting like doing email or like even today, I needed to send out some emails for clients, and I wasn't exactly sure how to do it. I wanted to get it right. I felt like they were important to me. So instead, I bought a program to help me schedule these appointments instead of making the emails myself. Like that is a perfectionist trap. I didn't realize it as perfectionism, but that's like I procrastinated doing something else useful
Mhm.
because I wanted to be perfect in something else.
Yeah.
And that probably happens more than I realize.
And I think it happens to more people than most people realize. I think there are very few people who have managed to completely escape perfectionism because we think of it the way I was thinking it, that you would be almost like pathologically perfectionist. But that's not how it shows up for a lot of us. A lot of us, it's just, I don't have the right things. I need the right paintbrush. I need the right paint. I don't have the right canvas. I don't have the right word processor. I've answered questions on Quora for a couple of years. I haven't really done it lately, but I've literally had people ask questions about how many words a chapter should be. I don't know. Every chapter's different. Don't get hung up on how many words a chapter should
Mhm.
be. Just write the chapter. But all of that kind of stuff, what's the right word processor to use? Which one do you like? That's the right word processor to use. All of that is perfectionism rearing its ugly head because we think we have to get hung up on that stuff, and we don't. So anything that's popping up, And the problem is, we don't want to label ourselves that way because it feels judgmental. Like, oh, you're a perfectionist. But if you don't label it that way, you don't have any awareness of it. And if you don't have the awareness of it, you can't do anything about it.
So before we get into some tips on that, you did say something that I just want to highlight, the comparison trap, and just how deadly that
Mhm.
is. What in your view, why is comparison bad, and what can you do about it?
Comparison, I'm not sure anymore if I came up with this or if I heard it from somebody else, but I always think of comparison as the thief of joy
Hmm.
because, every single one of us is different. Every single one of us brings something unique to the table. And we all have heard this and we all kind of tend to roll our eyes and say, yeah, that's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And so if we think that we have to be like everybody else, we deny what's unique and special about ourselves. And it's also a form of self rejection because we're more interested in what's great about somebody else than we are in what's great about us.
You don't even
You
see
don't
it.
even see it.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story I recently was reading in the book, The Gap in the Gain. It's by Benjamin Harding, and I'm forgetting the other guy's name. It's they did 10x is easier than 2x, The Gap in the Gain, Who Not How, those types of books. And they tell a story about going on a trip with their kids, and one of the meals that they got had a cookie in it. And so they divided the cookie up, and everybody got a piece of the cookie. And one kid ate their cookie and then was like upset because he felt like somebody else had a bigger cookie. And now he was more upset after he had a cookie than before he had a cookie because he was comparing himself to what other people had. I feel like that's such a big trap when we don't recognize we have good things. And when we compare ourselves to what other people have, we often become more upset than if we had nothing to begin with. It's just something I'm realizing in my life that I often fall into that comparison trap where I'm like, oh, I wish I had more clients, or I wish I had a bigger audience, or I wish I had a bigger email list, or anything like that. I wish I had more podcast downloads. Like all those measures where we look at other people on the wall,
Yeah.
their handwriting on the wall with stickers on it, and we wish we had those things. Well, in actuality, you're you're so much further along than you used to be. Like if you
Right.
looked at yourself from where you started with no clients, no podcasts, no downloads, no stickers, then you would realize you're in a much better place. But we look at what we don't have instead of what we have, and I think that's really uh,
We
deadly.
do. And the other thing we tend to do is compare our behind the scenes to other people's highlight reel. We're not seeing other people's messy floor on Instagram. We're seeing their carefully curated image. We don't see the stuff that's behind the scenes. You're seeing their eye level stuff. You don't see their messy floor. You have no idea that they have a messy floor too.
Great point. Um, so we talked in the pre-show about maybe talking over some tips or ways to deal with some of this perfectionism. Do you have some things or tips you want to share with the audience about how to change their mindset or overcome some of the perfectionism tendencies?
Sure. Perfectionism is tricky, especially if you don't want to recognize it. That's honestly the first thing that I would recommend. You really need to just step back and take a breath and be honest with yourself, which is hard. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it because it's not the easiest thing in the world, but you want to be nice to yourself about it and recognize that you are not alone. Perfectionism is like the most normal thing ever, especially these days, because again, everybody's looking at Instagram. Everybody's got it. I think there are probably some exceptions to that rule, but they are so rare. So everybody's got it. I mean, you can even see it in kids. I used to say that kids were immune. But I watched my nephew 6 years ago at Christmas have an absolute meltdown because the thing that he was drawing a picture of wasn't perfect enough. And I was like, okay, it sets
Mhm.
in way earlier than I thought. So
Mhm.
everybody's got it. It is not just you. And the first thing to do is to have compassion for yourself because you're not alone. It's a very, very human thing. And and so just recognize this is normal and it's okay. And if you can just be 5% more okay with that, and if 5% seems too big, try 3%. And if that's too big, try 1%. And just breathe with it. And just say, okay, it's all right. And a lot of the time the things that we get hung up on, I mean, I worked as an editor and a proofreader. Does it really matter if the apostrophe is curly or not? Does it really make a difference? Will the world actually end? A lot of the things that we get hung up on don't actually matter. So picking your battles is part of it.
You made me think of creating PowerPoints that people will see for 10 seconds and then
Yeah.
like it and just like going through hundreds of pictures to find the exact right one where I found one 10 seconds in and I'm like, oh, that's good. And then I just look for another 30 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't help that once you see something like that, you can't not see it. But you
Yeah.
are one of a million other people who did that same thing that day,
Yeah.
you know? And that's it's the nobody is setting off a nuclear bomb by accident because of that one tiny little thing.
Mhm.
If you're a nuclear engineer, obviously you have a degree of precision to live up to that most of the rest of us don't. But if you're not, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Often your 80% is somebody else's 100%.
Right.
So
But another thing is just to try, you know, part of what gets to us about perfectionism is that we have an overactive inner critic. And it's the inner critic and the voice of the inner critic that is so difficult to bear. It's not the mistake itself, it's what we tell ourselves about it. So there are two things to try to deal with the inner critic. One is to write down the stuff that the inner critic is telling you, because when you get it out of your head and onto a piece of paper, it's much easier to see that it's not actually you. And it can be really, really, really satisfying to take that piece of paper and crumple it up and throw it across the room, or if you're able to set it on fire, if you can do it
mhm.
safely, anything like that, to just be like, yeah, this isn't me and I'm going to get rid of it. It's not going to permanently silence your inner critic, but it'll help, especially if you do it over time. But the other thing is deliberately sit down and say, I'm going to do a thing badly. The thing that we're all told as kids is anything worth doing is worth doing well. But what if it's
Yeah.
just as true that anything that's worth doing is worth doing badly? And you say, I'm going to sit down and write a terrible poem. First of all, you'll be surprised at how difficult it is to get yourself to deliberately write a terrible poem. But what you'll also discover is that your inner critic shuts up because it has nothing to do, because you're not trying to write a perfect poem. So it can't nitpick what you're doing. That leaves you alone.
Right. Yeah, with you're speaking a lot to me about some of my journey because when I first started, I was like get stuck in the comparison trap, listening to the negative thoughts. Like, you don't have any clients, you don't have an email list. Why would somebody download your stuff? Why would somebody listen to your podcast? Why would somebody buy your course? So I did what you said, and I think I got this exercise from a Mike Michalowicz book, who does Profit First and a bunch of other books. And the Pumpkin Plan is one that I like from him. Anyways, he said on one side, write those negative thoughts, and then on the other side, reframe the thought. So if you say, "Why I have nobody on my email list to sell anything to," the reframe, that's the negative thought. The reframe is, well, everybody starts with nobody on their list. It's such a freeing thought, though, to like instead of live and stew in your
Yeah.
own negativity to reframe it with some positive thoughts. And the thing about, oh, I'm going to write a bad poem, most of the time, the first time we try something, it's often our
It's gonna
worst
be
time
bad.
we've done it. Yeah, it's not going to be the best. And so that keeps us from doing it. But when we don't do those things, we don't learn the lessons that we need to do from doing it poorly. Somebody said, make more mistakes. I can't remember who it was. It was like, make more mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard
Right.
enough. And I love how you're helping us reframe that inner critic, to reframe our mistakes are part of our success. You have to make
Yeah, if
them.
you're not making mistakes, you're not learning anything.
Yeah. Um, so those were, I love that part. We talked about tips, and you said, so step back, take a breath, be honest with yourself. You're not alone. Deal with the inner critic. Do you have another tip for us?
Let's see. Something easy. You know, the other thing you can do with that list of stuff from your inner critic is to really blow it out of proportion because,
What do you mean by that?
like if there's something and obviously like the inner critic stuff can get really depending on your experience. Inner critic stuff is usually the voices that you picked up as a kid. And I'm
Mhm.
realizing lately that a lot of those, people say that they're like the voices of your parents and whatever, and they are, but I think that we actually install them ourselves preemptively because we're trying to keep from hearing the negative voices from our parents. So we've, in a twisted way, we've kind of installed them as a protective thing, which is anyway, it's very twisted, but it makes sense. But, they're trying to help us, but they're not. They're keeping us from doing the stuff that we want to do.
Oh,
So you don't, if there's really, really dark, icky stuff in there, you got to be careful with it. And I know I'm talking to an audience of therapists, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But some of the stuff that we pick up through those voices that turns into our inner critic is really kind of ridiculous when you actually start looking at it and put it under a microscope. So if somebody told you something that was completely crazy, you can just kind of blow it out of proportion and you really start to see how silly it is. And if you get to that point where you can actually laugh at it, that really neutralizes the effect of it. And then, it's easier to laugh at it when you hear it on a regular basis when you haven't blown it up. And you can just kind of go, yeah, whatever, I'm going to go do my own thing. Which, having a comeback like that in place is also, regardless of whether you blow it up or not, and you just kind of go, yeah, so what? I'm going to do it anyhow, is a great technique too.
do you have an example? Like, let's see. What if let's go back to my email example. Like, I really like, oh, I'm gonna write this email, but I don't have the words to say, or I'm what's a negative thing? I'm gonna use bad grammar or something. It's harder to do now with Grammarly installed, but still.
Yeah, like,
I pay for Grammarly because I am not the best at that. But
well, so if you're hearing something like, I'm going to write the worst email ever because my
Mhm.
grammar is going to be terrible and my grammar is going to be so bad that, this other person is going to read my email and they're going to misinterpret it. And because they
Right,
misinterpret it, someone is going to do something completely the opposite of what I said. They're going to call someone and I don't know, I'm totally making this up off of the top of my head here, right?
sure.
They're gonna call someone and that person is gonna pick up the phone and call the White House and there will be an international crisis because of my
Okay,
email, Like blowing it completely
that's
out of
absurd.
proportion so
Yeah,
that it's
okay,
totally absurd.
that
Yeah,
makes
so that
sense.
there's no
As
question
as
that obviously that's not gonna happen.
right, yeah. What's the worst case scenario? they might ask me a question. What do you mean
Yeah,
by
they'd
that?
say, "Could you clarify this piece here?" And you go, "Oh, yeah, that didn't really make
Or I
much
have to
sense.
send a second
Let me
email.
try that
Yeah.
again."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes
yeah.
sense. So these are great tips for dealing with perfectionism. Uh, I know you have do you have more resources for this?
I do. I'm actually offering a course called Make Bad Art. And it's
Okay.
inspired literally by the idea of deliberately sitting down and making bad art, writing the bad poem,
Mhm,
doing a left-handed
mhm,
drawing that you fully
mhm,
expect will be terrible. I did this a year or two ago, and I thought, I can't draw right-handed. So what on earth did I think was going to come out of drawing left-handed? But because I had no expectations, which is also part of what happens when you deliberately make bad art, I actually drew a better thing than I probably would have drawn with my right hand. I was blown away. And so this is the other thing that tends to happen when you make bad art. You have to make bad art in order to make good art. The good art sneaks out with the bad art because your inner critic shuts up. And so it allows the good art to come out. The trick becomes not psyching yourself into saying, "Oh, I'm going to go make some bad art in the hope that the good art comes out," because then all of the inner critic-y kind of
mhm.
stuff starts to sneak back in. But yeah, it's a 6-week program that is designed to help you actually get into that mindset that liberates you from worrying about self-judgment and criticism and moving you into a more self-compassionate place where you can play and have fun. I mean, that's really the whole idea. If you get into that spot, all sorts of amazing things can happen.
So it sounds like you're using art to help people change their mindset.
It's an interesting overlap because,
Yeah.
when you do more creativity, you have more energy, you have more of a playful mindset anyway. And so, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And so it's a great way to get there from either direction.
Is this for artists or can anybody take it?
Anybody can come play.
Take it? Because I really do see the overlap. Like if somebody's, let's say they're the perfectionist about, um, sometimes therapists when they want to expand, I help them do online courses, but there's other ways to expand, hiring people, buying buildings, selling your practice, anything that helps you earn money. But all of them are outside the comfort zone, and you have to deal with your negative critic when you go outside that comfort zone. So, what if you took a class like, how to make bad art to teach you the skills of being okay with not being perfect? I can really see that as a benefit to people who might want to try, something new that is going to teach them a mindset and probably be a little bit fun along the way too.
Yeah, and it's easier in a group.
Right.
Especially if you're in
Yeah.
an environment, working as an editor and proofreader, by definition, is a very perfectionistic job. So if you're
Mhm.
in a situation like that and you really wanna introduce less perfectionism into your life, it's really tough to do it on your own. But even if you're
Right.
not,
Absolutely.
it's helpful to do it in a group because, again, that sense of being alone is really hard to overcome when you are effectively on your own. It's so much easier in a group, even if it's a small virtual group, because you've got kindred spirits who are there with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. Thanks for spreading the message about fighting perfectionism and the comparison trap. So, where can people find you? Do you have email, Facebook, or webpage? Where can people find you on the internet?
So my website is fycuriosity.com. It's short for Follow Your Curiosity. And I have a Substack that's fycuriosity.substack.com. And I'll send you a link for the Make Bad Art page. It's a little probably easier for people to find that way. And I'm on Instagram. I'm on what's left of Twitter, sort of, kind of.
Yep.
I'm on Blue Sky too as FY Curiosity. I'm pretty much FY Curiosity everywhere I could get it. So
Great.
yeah,
Well, I'll definitely put those in the show notes. Any final encouragement for our audience before we go today?
Just know that, if you're dealing with perfectionism, you're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing to remember is you're not alone. And, it's insidious, but it's not impossible to put chinks in its armor.
Awesome. There's
hope.
There is hope. Nancy, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciated our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, listeners, you heard it here. It's time to overcome some of your perfectionism tendency, and there is support for you. Thanks so much for listening to the show. It's now time to go put your mission in motion.